If you have ever coached kids or led a youth organization, you know that some of the biggest challenges in working with kids have nothing to do with kids and have nothing to do with the sport and have nothing to do with the activity, but have to do with parents and grandparents who think that their child deserves just a little better than whatever it is you're giving to them. And some of the confrontations can happen in some really inconvenient times, in public, if the complainers think that they can get a little more mileage out of embarrassing you or humiliating you to achieve their goals. And so coaches and leaders have to kind of steel themselves, be on guard and be ready, because you never really know when the ambush from a parent or a grandparent might happen. Well, as we continue our study in the life of Jesus today, we will witness the mom of two of Jesus' disciples going to Jesus and asking for special concessions for her boys. Just reading this account might make you squirm a little bit. And actually, I think that's what the gospel writer Matthew wanted. He wants us to feel that uncomfortableness even with the question. So stand if you're able. Let's read our text together. We're going to be reading from Matthew chapter 20, verses 17 to 28. "12 disciples aside, and on the way he said to them, 'See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified. And he will be raised on the third day.' Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked for something. And he said to her, 'What do you want?' She said to him, 'Say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom.' Jesus answered, 'You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?' They said to him, 'We are able.' He said to them, 'You will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father.' And when the hen heard this, they were indignant at the two brothers. But Jesus called them to him and said, 'You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you, for whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many.'" Thank you. You may be seated. May God add his blessing to the reading of the gospel. So we're in the last couple weeks of Jesus' life now, and several weeks, and with every passing day, Jesus gives a little more information about what is soon going to be happening to him. And the verses that we just read reveal some brand new details to the disciples, things they've never heard before. In verses 18 and 19, he said, "We are going to Jerusalem." Jerusalem's the place where this is the first time it's been mentioned as the place where all this stuff is going to happen. He says, "Who will arrest him? The Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and scribes." They're going to be the guys. This is the first time he talked about a trial. They will condemn him to death. He would be tried and condemned by the Jewish leaders. But he says Gentiles, Romans, would end up deciding his fate. First time he said that. Jesus has never before mentioned flogging or the method of his execution, flogged and crucified. And last, he predicted his resurrection. He's done so obliquely in the past, but never really came out and said he will be raised on the third day. Now, you would think that the disciples, hearing these really specific details about what's coming, would respond with something like, no way, no way, Jesus. We are not going to we have to stop this right here. What do we need to do to protect you? Let's not even, why do we need to go to Jerusalem anyway? Let's just stay away from there. We cannot risk losing you. But apparently, once again, what Jesus had just said just kind of flew right over their heads, because you don't hear any of that discussion. And not only their heads, but the heads of other people who probably were listening in on the conversation. You know that Jesus' entourage, as he traveled from town to town, was quite large. There were a number of women, up to 20 women, who traveled along with Jesus and his disciples. And in that entourage was Jesus' mother, Mary. She was usually there. And his aunt, who was Mary's sister. She was in the group. Jesus' aunt's name was Salome, Aunt Salome. Now, this is a different than the Salome. Herodias had a daughter named Salome. Remember, who asked for John the Baptist's head? Different Salome, okay? The Salome following Jesus was married to a man named Zebedee. Zebedee was a commercial fisherman up on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And two of Salome and Zebedee's sons, James and John, were among the first disciples of Jesus. And so Salome and Zebedee, just being normal parents, wanted to make sure that their sons had every advantage. So what Salome did was not that different from what many parents do today. I mean, who expects parents to be objective? I mean, it's one thing to lie and say they're on the rowing team and get them into Stanford or somewhere. That's probably over the top. But we're not objective. We all are biased toward our kids. And Salome was proud of her boys. And so she wanted to position them as best she could for success. Now, it's worth noting that although the Lord did not grant her request, this wasn't a terrible rebuke. Salome remained a faithful follower of Jesus. She went with him into Jerusalem. She was there at the cross with Mary, her sister. She was at Jesus' tomb on resurrection morning. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if Salome and Mary had even talked about this before Salome went to Jesus with this request. And I suspect that James and John were probably not surprised at what their mom did either. Maybe he had even talked to mom about some of the stuff that was, you know how groups are. You got a group of 20, 30, 35 people. There's little talk that's going on all the time. And everybody, they all had been talking about Jesus renaming this fellow Galilean disciple named Peter, renamed him the Rock. And then Jesus seemed to be appointing Peter to be the head of the disciples. And it's not difficult to imagine Salome thinking, what? Peter in charge of my boys? Why, I've known Peter since he was in diapers. And that kid lacks judgment. I mean, I've seen him do some really dangerous things. I don't think this is a very good idea. I think I better have a talk with Jesus. Not hard to imagine that, is it? So she comes to Jesus, and she came respectfully. Notice in verse 20, it says, then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to Jesus with her sons and kneeling. She's very respectful. She's kneeling before him, and she asked Jesus for something. Now, what she asked for was not right, okay? Just like parents asking for special privilege for their kids today is not right. But seeking the promotion of children was probably even more common in their day than it is today, especially for upper class people in the ancient world. And we know that Zebedee and Salome were upper class people. He had very high connections in Jerusalem. The high priest knew Zebedee personally. They were friends. And plus, how many families had sacrificed as much as the Zebedee family had sacrificed for Jesus? When his sons decided to follow Jesus, Zebedee all of a sudden is left with an empty fishing boat. These sons are gone, and What's he going to do? He's going to have the servants step up a little more. And Salome didn't make dinner for Zebedee most days because Salome was on the road with Jesus, and she was preparing meals along with the other women. And sometimes she even bought food. They bought food out of their own pockets, the Bible says. And so for months at a time, she would be gone with Jesus as he traveled from town to town. Salome is asking for a favor, not really that much unlike a favor that was in the Jewish scriptures. Bathsheba asked for a similar favor a long, long time back. When King David was old and very feeble, there were some characters that tried to position themselves to take David's throne from whenever he finally kicked the bucket. And David was living in assisted living when Bathsheba heard that a guy named Adonijah had proclaimed himself king. Of all the arrogance, can you believe it? And Bathsheba went to see David. 1 Kings 1:15. So Bathsheba went into the king's bedroom. He was very old now, and Abishag was taking care of him. See, I told you, assisted living. And Bathsheba bowed down before the king. "What can I do for you?" he asked her. And she replied, "My lord, you made a vow before the Lord your God when you said to me, 'Your son Solomon will surely be the next king and will sit on my throne.' But instead, Adonijah has made himself king." And Bathsheba goes, "And you don't even know about it. I'm telling you about this." So David signed a decree that our son will be king. And David did it. He did it. So if Bathsheba could do it for her son, why couldn't Salome do it for her son? Now, notice in verse 22 how Jesus responds to Salome and her sons. They're with her. Mom has done all the talking as far as we know. But when Jesus answers, he uses the plural form of the pronoun you. And I think he's looking straight at James and John. Verse 22, Jesus answered, "You, James and John, you do not know what you are asking." So I kind of know you're behind this. "Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?" And they said to him, "Yeah, we can." I mean, they're picturing a bejeweled cup, a goblet filled with good wine, and a steward standing ready with the flask, ready to refill it. As soon as the king wants it refilled, they're thinking of Jesus sitting on King David's throne and in this new golden age of Israel. After all, we know he is the Messiah, and Messiah is going to restore the kingdom of David. Can we handle that kind of treatment? They kind of look at each other. Yeah. I think we can. Let's give it a shot. Verse 23. And he said to them, "You will drink my cup." And they did. As a matter of fact, James was the first disciple to die. In 44 AD, King Herod Agrippa I killed him. Here's Acts chapter 12. About that time, Herod the king laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church. He killed James, the brother of John, with a sword. And one by one, almost all of the disciples would drink the same cup. But a cup of suffering was the farthest thing from the minds of James and John and the other disciples who heard about Salome's request. And I don't know, but maybe James and John had done a little bit of bragging. Well, just wait until tomorrow. Wait till our mom goes to Jesus. You guys will see. Look at verse 24. Because the 10 heard about it. And when the 10 heard it, they were ticked with the two brothers. You guys try to put one over on us? Can't believe you tried to cut a special deal with Jesus. Now, the 10 disciples were probably thinking two things. Number one, first of all, they're probably all kicking themselves for not beating James and John and their mother to Jesus and asking for the same thing. Man, I thought about that, a few weeks ago, but I didn't have the guts to go ask. Man, I should have asked. And then second, I think the other 10 are thinking pecking order. You know how it works. what am I going to lose if James and John get promoted? I mean, it happens at every business, in every office, every workplace, every school, every church. Whenever there's a reshuffling of position, the first question that comes to mind is, how are these changes going to affect me, my job description, my privileges, my authority, my chances for advancement, my pay? What about me? So this quarrel breaks out among the disciples because they believed a dictum that still very much prevails today, in that it's better to be the one giving orders than taking orders. You know, it just is. It's better to be the one in charge. Now, the irony, of course, is Jesus had already promised them all leadership positions, all 12 of them. He had told all the disciples that they would one day be judging the 12 tribes of Israel in his eternal kingdom. He'd said that quite some time before. But they wanted power and they wanted privilege right now, and they certainly didn't relish the idea of taking orders from James and John. Verse 25. But Jesus called them over to him, and he said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you." In other words, he's saying, come on, you guys. You're acting like a bunch of Romans. You're acting like Gentiles. Haven't you learned anything from me? And then he repeated what he'd said many times before. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Now, the Greek word for servant is the same word that the New Testament uses for deacon. Must be your deacon, must be your minister, must serve. A servant was someone who was hired to oversee a household or oversee a business. And it was a fairly honorable role. And we're okay with that. You call me a servant if you want. But then Jesus continued, and whoever would be first among you, must be your slave. You must be the slave. Now, you know the status of first century slaves. They were unpaid. They had no rights. They had no freedom to decide anything. Other than fellow slaves, every person that you looked at was higher status than you. Slaves, all they could do is submit, do what somebody else said. And that is what Jesus asked his followers to do. Here's the really radical point that Jesus is making. Significance for Christ followers comes from serving, not titles, and not lording it over. Jesus said, if you want to be great, become a servant. And then because his disciples, he knew his disciples didn't get that because he'd said that before. He says it even more strongly. Okay, whoever wants to be first place must become a common slave. What Jesus proposed was a revolutionary model of leadership. He was advocating turning society basically upside down, turning these structures upside down. So the further up the leadership ladder you go in the church, in Christ's kingdom, the less rights you have. And the more you have to sacrifice. And the more vulnerable you become. Because really you're at the bottom of the ladder. You're a slave. Now, of course, Jesus himself was the ultimate example. Verse 27 again, whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served. The king of the new kingdom had every right to demand that other people serve him, but he didn't do that. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, the only people that were ransomed in Jesus' day were slaves. And Jesus said he would give his life to purchase the freedom of completely undeserving people. Now you have to wonder if these were some of the words that still reverberated in the ears of Jesus' disciples as they watched their leader get arrested and taken away, and ultimately heard that he had yielded his life. I think it took a while for it all to sink in, but there's plenty of evidence in the New Testament that the apostles got it. These disciples, most of them did get the message. Paul repeatedly refers to himself throughout all his letters in the New Testament as a servant of Christ, sometimes even a slave. In Revelation 1, John, this is Salome's son John, calls himself a servant. Peter does the same thing in 2 Peter 1:1. Jesus' half-brother James, different James, takes the same title in James chapter 1, verse 1. But it's not a natural role for most of us, is it? It doesn't come easy. In his book, The Cross of Christ, John Stott wrote, "Our world and even the church is full of Jameses and Johns, go-getters and status seekers, hungry for honor and prestige, measuring life by achievements and everlastingly dreaming of success." So all around us, we see people who think in order to get ahead, they got to be more aggressive, more manipulative, more intimidating, more demanding of others. But when those tactics are employed, you know what happens. There's just a trail of wounded people, broken people behind. It should not be that way in a church. It should not be that way. Now, ambition is not bad. Setting goals is a good thing. Striving is a good thing. Ambition is bad when it hurts and uses other people to get what you want. When it's motivated by pride, when it's motivated by jealousy. We all know John 3:16. Everybody memorizes John 3:16. There's another 3:16 that I think everybody should memorize. And it comes from the book of James. James 3:16, where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. I mean, think about it. Think about the divisions that you've seen in organizations, in churches, in families. They can almost always be traced to either jealousy or selfish ambition. Did I lose the mic? Maybe switch to the third. Almost always be traced to either jealousy or selfish ambition. And Jesus said, if you want to be significant in my kingdom, get down. Get on your knees. Confess your pride. Confess your self-centeredness so that the Holy Spirit can free you to exalt Christ and to serve others. Eric, you come on back up, and we're going to sing. We're going to respond to this story in song, and then we'll have a benediction.